Am I the a-hole for making my fiancé choose between me and his best friend? My fiancé, 34M, and I have been together for 8 years and engaged for about 6 months. His female best friend, 33F, is actually the person who introduced us. They have been friends since university for around 10 years. According to both of them, nothing physical or romantic has ever happened between them. Before we got together, they used to hang out alone as well as in groups, go partying together, and they have even slept next to each other several times without anything happening. When I first came into the picture, their friendship and the way they interacted was mostly something I could tolerate. I accepted that they had a deep bond, shared history, and mutual comfort with one another. I tried to fit into that dynamic as best as I could because I loved him and I wanted to be on good terms with the people who mattered to him. I tried being friends with her myself, but our personalities are honestly too similar for us to genuinely get along. We are both very extroverted, talkative, and like being the center of attention. In my experience, when we are together, one of us inevitably has to take a step back or we end up clashing. If I spoke up, she would talk over me. If she commanded the room, I found myself quietly withdrawing just to keep the peace. It became obvious very early on that a genuine, close friendship between the two of us was never going to happen, so I maintained a polite, friendly distance while allowing them to keep their own dynamic. The problem is that things have changed dramatically over the past year and a half. About a year and a half ago, she started going through a divorce from her husband, with whom she has a 5-year-old daughter. The split was messy, contentious, and hit her hard. But instead of seeking professional help or turning to healthy coping mechanisms, she completely spiraled. She started using drugs, sleeping around, doing horizontal tango for money, and generally seems to care very little about how her behavior affects other people. As her life started falling apart, her social circle rapidly disintegrated. Most of her old male friends are not really in her life anymore. With some of them, something eventually happened horizontally tango-wise, which ruined the dynamic. Some apparently got tired of waiting for something to happen between them, realizing she was just using them for attention. Others have moved on with their own partners and families, building stable lives and simply not allowing her to be such a major, disruptive part of their lives anymore. She does have female friends, but from what I have seen, those relationships are pretty superficial. They use each other for validation, talk behind each other's backs, go out drinking together when it is convenient, and are not really people she can rely on when things get difficult. She's not particularly close to her family either, often going months without speaking to them due to long-standing resentment and arguments. So, essentially, there is one person left who she constantly relies on, my fiancé. For the past year and a half, she has been calling him multiple times a day and messaging him constantly. It does not matter what time of day or night it is. She'll call while we are eating dinner, while we are watching a movie, or while we are in bed trying to sleep. She frequently comes over to our apartment and sometimes stays here for several days at a time. She treats our home like her personal sanctuary and crash pad, showing up unannounced, leaving her personal belongings scattered around our living space, and completely disrupting our routines. She uses my fiancé as her main source of emotional support, unloading every single panic attack, legal issue, and relationship breakdown onto him. Because he considers himself a good friend and feels a deep sense of loyalty toward her, he tries to be there whenever she needs him, dropping whatever he's doing to answer her calls or sit with her on the couch for hours listening to her cry. For a while, I understood it. I felt genuine sympathy for her situation. I actually tried to support her too. I have babysat her daughter when she had nowhere else to turn, driving over to pick the little girl up so she would not be caught in the middle of her mother's chaotic life. I have lent and given her money for groceries and basic expenses when she claimed she was struggling to get by, and I tried to help because I felt sorry for what she was going through. I genuinely wanted her to get back on her feet for her own sake and for her child's sake. But eventually, I felt like she started crossing boundaries, taking advantage of our kindness, and completely invading our private life. I messaged her directly and asked her not to come over so often because my fiancé and I needed some space to focus on our own relationship, especially with us being engaged and trying to plan our future together. She received the message, acted understanding at first, and respected that for a while. But eventually, as her personal chaos picked up again, everything went back to her way. She resumed calling constantly and knocking on our door without warning. I then specifically asked that she not come to our apartment on certain days because I wanted those days to be just for us to unwind, have quiet dinners, and reconnect without any outside stress. I made it clear to both her and my fiancé that those specific evenings were off-limits. She still showed up anyway, standing at our door with a fresh crisis, completely ignoring the boundaries I had set. My fiancé, unable to turn her away at the door, would let her in, completely erasing the private time we had planned. The thing that really pushed me over the edge, though, was her behavior before going out to do horizontal tango for money. There have been numerous occasions when she has stopped by our apartment beforehand wearing extremely revealing outfits, very low-cut tops, tiny dresses, no bra under very sheer clothing, and outfits that left almost nothing to the imagination. I wouldn't normally care what another woman chooses to wear in her own personal time, but then she would sit there on our sofa, right in front of my fiancé, and talk in graphic detail about how badly she needed to get laid, how much she wanted someone to do the horizontal tango with her, and how her private parts were so thirsty for some action. She said all of this in my presence, in our shared home, while looking directly at my fiancé for validation or a reaction. Sitting there and listening to her speak so explicitly to my future husband while dressed like that made my skin crawl. It was not just uncomfortable, it felt deeply disrespectful to me, to our home, and to our commitment to each other. It was a deliberate display of boundary crossing, testing how much she could get away with right in front of me. At that point, I told my fiancé I had had enough and that I wanted him to permanently end his friendship with her. We have now been arguing about this for a week. The tension in our home is unbearable. He says he understands why her behavior bothers me and agrees that some of it is completely inappropriate, but he doesn't want to throw away a 10-year friendship. He keeps bringing up their history, how she was there for him in university, and how she is the reason we met in the first place. He feels a sense of guilt, believing that abandoning her now when she is at her absolute rock bottom would make him a terrible person. He also thinks it is unfair of me to ask him to completely cut someone out of his life, framing my demand as an ultimatum that forces him to choose between his loyalty to a longtime friend and his commitment to me. My position is that this has gone way beyond occasionally helping a friend who is going through a difficult divorce. For the past year and a half, she has essentially treated my fiancé as her primary emotional support person while repeatedly ignoring boundaries I have tried to establish in our own home. She has taken over our personal space, brought graphic and explicit conversations into our living room, and consistently placed her demands above our relationship. And yes, I am jealous and I admit that. I feel like another woman is constantly taking up my fiancé's time and attention, making herself a priority in his life, while also disrespecting me and repeatedly crossing my boundaries without any real consequences from him. I am tired of having our private lives put on hold to manage her self-inflicted chaos. At this point, I have decided that if he refuses to end the friendship, I am going to end our engagement and relationship. I cannot walk into a marriage where there is a third person constantly pulling at my partner, disrespecting our boundaries, and taking priority over our home peace. So, am I the a-hole for giving my fiancé this ultimatum and asking him to permanently cut off his female best friend? Update. A lot of you asked me for an update on my previous post, so here it is. First of all, thank you so much to everyone who shared their opinions and commented. I genuinely appreciate every perspective, and I'm really grateful that so many of you took the time to help me look at the situation from different angles. I expected people to disagree with me, especially because I was asking my fiancé to end a friendship that had existed for around 10 years, so I wasn't expecting such a strong response from so many people. After our last argument, some time passed when my fiancé and I barely spoke about the situation. We weren't fighting constantly, but there was definitely a lot of tension between us. I had already made my position clear, and he knew that I wasn't going to suddenly decide that everything was fine just because we were tired of arguing about it. He had time to think about everything, and I had all of you here helping me. Smiley face. When the topic came up again, I didn't argue with him. Instead, I sat down next to him, showed him my post, and started reading some of your comments out loud. I also sent him the link and told him that if he couldn't sleep that night alone, he was more than welcome to keep reading through the comments himself. I wasn't expecting him to suddenly agree with every single person on Reddit. Honestly, some of the comments were pretty harsh, and I knew there were going to be people who would go much further than I would. I mostly wanted him to understand that what had become normal to him wasn't necessarily normal from the perspective of someone outside the situation. The next morning, I still didn't really discuss it with him. I simply kept screenshotting some of the newer comments and sending them to him. A few were so brutally worded that I think the mods have probably removed them by now, but there were also plenty of thoughtful comments explaining exactly why people thought his behavior was unfair to me. What seemed to affect him most wasn't one particular comment. It was the sheer number of people who independently noticed the same problem. He had been looking at the situation as though I was asking him to choose between his fiancée and an old friend for no real reason. Reading the comments made him realize that other people weren't seeing it that way at all. They were looking at the amount of time she spent with him, the way she repeatedly ignored boundaries in our home, how dependent she had become on him emotionally, and the fact that he had continued allowing the situation to escalate even after I told him how uncomfortable I was. He was genuinely shocked by how many people understood my perspective. I could also tell that he was ashamed of himself. Not because strangers on Reddit had called him names, but because he realized that he'd been focusing so heavily on protecting a 10-year friendship that he hadn't really stopped to consider what his actions were doing to our relationship. Since then, he's had more time to think about everything. A few days later, he apologized to me. He admitted that he hadn't taken my previous requests seriously enough and that he'd treated them as though they were simply jealousy that would eventually pass. He told me that he now understood why this had become such a huge problem for me. He also admitted that he had become so used to being the person she called whenever something went wrong that he hadn't noticed how far the friendship had shifted. What may have started as him helping a longtime friend through a difficult divorce had turned into a situation where she expected him to be available constantly. That was something I appreciated hearing, because I never expected him to abandon someone simply because she was going through a terrible period in her life. I had supported her too. I babysat her daughter, gave or lent her money, listened to her problems, and tried to be understanding for a long time. My problem was never that she needed help. My problem was that she had gradually made my fiancé her primary source of emotional support while also repeatedly disregarding the boundaries I had tried to establish in our home. My fiancé finally told me that because of everything that had happened, he had decided to end his friendship with her permanently for the sake of our relationship. They had a phone conversation a few days ago. He basically told her, politely, that she needed to back off and that he couldn't continue having the same kind of friendship they had been having. He explained that the situation had become unhealthy for our relationship and that he needed to put distance between them. From what he told me, she wasn't happy about it. She has messaged him on Messenger since then despite that conversation, but he hasn't responded. He told me he has no intention of responding either. He said that if she continues messaging him despite being told to back off, he will tell her that he wants to meet her in person. During that meeting, he intends to properly and completely end their friendship and make it clear that this isn't about one argument or one particular incident. It's about the entire dynamic between them and the fact that it has been damaging our relationship for a long time. I told him that if he decides to have that conversation, he needs to be completely honest with her. I don't want some vague version of, maybe we should talk less, or I need some space right now. That's not what I asked for, and after everything that's happened, I don't think something that vague would actually change anything. If he's ending the friendship, then he's ending it. Something else happened that I found interesting. A few days ago, we met up with a mutual female friend who knows all three of us, me, my fiancé, and his female friend. I told her what had been happening because she already knew there had been tension, although she didn't know all the details. She completely understood my position. Then she told us that she'd actually had her own negative experience with this woman involving boundaries and respect. Apparently, there was a man who was important to our mutual friend, and she had specifically asked this woman not to contact him. She made that request directly and was given a promise that it would be respected. It wasn't. The woman contacted him anyway and broke the promise she had made. That honestly surprised me because I had started wondering whether I was simply being too sensitive about the boundary issue. Hearing someone else describe a completely separate situation where she had also ignored a clearly stated request made me look at things differently. This doesn't mean every disagreement she's ever had with another person automatically proves that she's a bad person. I'm not claiming that. But it did make me realize that what happened between us wasn't necessarily an isolated misunderstanding. She had been told where the boundary was, and she crossed it anyway. That was also what bothered me most about the situation with my fiancé. I wasn't asking her to disappear from the planet. I had asked her not to come over constantly because my fiancé and I needed time alone. Then I had specifically asked her not to come to our apartment on certain days because I wanted those days to be just for us. She respected it for a while and then went back to doing what she wanted. At some point, it stopped feeling like a misunderstanding and started feeling like my requests simply weren't important enough to her. And my fiancé had allowed that to continue. That's the part I've been trying to make him understand. Long story short, I told my fiancé that I'm sorry, but after everything that has happened, I need this person completely out of our lives. He accepted that. He chose our relationship, and I'm giving him the opportunity to prove through his actions that he means what he's saying. I don't want to punish him or make him feel like he's being controlled. He is an adult, and ultimately the decision is his. That's why I made my own decision clear instead of pretending I could force him to do anything. If he wanted to continue that friendship, he was free to do so. I was also free to decide that I didn't want to stay in that relationship. That's where my ultimatum came from. I know some people are going to say that relationships shouldn't involve ultimatums, and normally I would agree. But there are situations where a person has to explain what they are and aren't willing to live with. For me, this became one of those situations. However, I will only consider this situation truly resolved once they have that final conversation and he clearly and honestly tells her that she can no longer be part of our lives in any capacity. Until then, I'm not going to pretend everything is magically fixed. Right now, he's doing what he said he would do. He's not responding to her messages, he's putting distance between them, and he's told me that he intends to have that final conversation if she contacts him again. I'm giving him the chance to follow through. I also told him something else very clearly. After that conversation, if I ever discover that they're still messaging, calling, meeting, or communicating behind my back in any way, there won't be another week of arguments or negotiations. I won't go through the same cycle again. I won't sit down and debate whether there was an innocent explanation, and I won't spend another year waiting for boundaries to finally be respected. I will simply end the relationship without any regrets or a single teardrop. There will be no more arguments, negotiations, or second chances. For now, though, I'm giving him the chance to follow through on what he has promised me. And once again, thank you to everyone who commented. Whether you agreed with me or challenged my perspective, you genuinely helped me think through this situation, and apparently, you helped my fiancé see it from a very different perspective too. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Daily Tales Update.